You know, I never liked to be told what to do. I just didn't like to be told what to do. And I didn't like for people to do things wrong.
Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I invite you into a story that brushes against death itself. A story of fate, guilt, and a single choice that changed the course of country music forever. It was February 3rd, 1959. A plane took off into the icy Iowa sky, carrying three of rock and roll's brightest stars, Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson. Moments later, that plane would crash into a frozen cornfield, killing everyone on board. That night became known as the day the music died. But what few people talk about is the man who was supposed to be on that flight, Waylon Jennings. Yes, Waylon Jennings, the outlaw legend, the deep voice behind country's rebellion, had a ticket for that flight. He was booked to be on that very plane, and at the last moment, he gave up his seat. What followed was not relief, but a lifetime of torment. Tonight, we're going to uncover the chilling truth behind that fateful night, the words Waylon wished he never said, and how that single decision haunted him, not for days, not for years, but for the rest of his life. Waylon Jennings was not born into fame. He was born into rhythm. From the dusty plains of Littlefield, Texas in 1937, Waylon Arnold Jennings entered the world with little more than a guitar in his hands and music in his bones. Raised during the tail end of the Great Depression, he was a boy of grit, tough, lean, country through and through. By age 12, he was already spinning records at a local radio station. By 16, he dropped out of school to chase a dream that most told him was foolish. But Waylon wasn't listening. In those early years, his sound was raw, rebellious, a far cry from the polished twang of Nashville's Grand Ole Opry. He was drawn to something darker, edgier, something that lived on the back roads of Texas rather than the bright stages of Tennessee. And yet, even then, one man recognized his talent, Buddy Holly. Buddy didn't just offer Jennings a job, he offered him a path. In 1958, Buddy asked Waylon to play bass in his new band. It was the break of a lifetime. For the young Texan, it was more than music. It was brotherhood. He admired Buddy, not just for his genius, but for his quiet leadership. Buddy brought discipline, ambition, and vision. Waylon brought fire. Together, they were unstoppable. As the 1960s unraveled, Waylon stepped into the spotlight on his own. But his rise wasn't conventional. Nashville's producers wanted clean, predictable, safe country stars. Waylon gave them cigarettes, leather vests, and a voice that rumbled like thunder. He clashed with labels. He demanded creative control. He wanted to write what he felt, not what they sold. By the 1970s, Waylon Jennings had become a giant. With albums like Honky Tonk Heroes and Dreaming My Dreams, he didn't just top charts, he redefined country music. He spearheaded the Outlaw movement alongside Willie Nelson, Chris Christopherson, and Johnny Cash. He wasn't just a performer, he was a cultural earthquake. Fans worshipped him. Men wanted to be him. Women adored him. To the public, Waylon was the epitome of cool. He was the last cowboy on the edge of the world, untamed, unbroken, unmistakably alive. And yet, beneath that swagger, beneath that black Stetson and steely stare, was a man carrying a wound he could never show. Because no matter how far he rode or how loud the crowd roared, one night from his youth, one decision never left him. It wasn't his music that haunted him. It was a plane that should have carried him, but didn't. It was January 1959. Waylon Jennings was just 21 years old, full of promise, full of speed, and touring the frozen Midwest as part of Buddy Holly's winter dance party. The lineup was legendary. Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, the Big Bopper, and young Waylon playing bass, riding a whirlwind of one-nighters, snow-covered highways, and sleepless nights. But the tour was a mess. The schedule was brutal. They were playing a different city every night, with no breaks and no time. The bus they traveled on was a rusty, unreliable nightmare. Its heater broke early in the tour, turning every ride into a shivering crawl across icy states. Some of the musicians even suffered frostbite. Equipment froze, tempers flared, spirits dropped. That's when Buddy had enough. Frustrated and exhausted, he chartered a small Beechcraft Bonanza to skip the overnight bus ride after the February 2nd concert in Clear Lake, Iowa. The plan was simple. Buddy, Waylon, and guitarist Tommy Allsup would fly ahead to Moorhead, Minnesota to get some rest, wash their clothes, and prepare for the next show. But, as fate would have it, a change was coming. At the last minute, the Big Bopper, who was battling the flu and struggling with the brutal cold, asked Waylon if he could take his seat on the plane. Bopper wasn't a small man. The cold bus was especially hard on him. And Waylon, young, kind, never thinking it would be more than a favor, said yes. He said yes. Then came the moment, that now infamous, bitter moment. Buddy Holly, playfully ribbing Waylon as he learned of the seat switch, quipped, "Well, I hope your old bus freezes up." To which Waylon replied with a grin, "Well, I hope your old plane crashes." That was the last thing he ever said to Buddy Holly. A joke, a passing jab between friends. Hours later, in the dead of night, that plane would lift into a snowstorm and disappear. Just minutes after takeoff, it crashed into a field outside Mason City, Iowa, killing everyone on board. Buddy Holly was gone. Ritchie Valens, gone. The Big Bopper, gone. And Waylon Jennings was alive. He heard the news the next morning. Sitting on that freezing bus somewhere between destinations, someone walked in and said, "The plane crashed." At first, he thought it was another cruel joke. Then the color left his face. Then silence. And then came the guilt. Heavy, immediate, crippling. Waylon would later say, "God Almighty, for years I thought I caused it. I believed I told Buddy to die." No one could convince him otherwise. That moment, the switch, the quip, the crash, etched itself into his bones. He would live, but never in the same way again. From the outside, Waylon Jennings' star was rising. In the years that followed the crash, he pushed deeper into music, climbing from backup bassist to solo act, from regional name to national icon. But behind the stage lights, the man was unraveling. He didn't talk about the plane crash, not in interviews, not with friends, not even with family. When people brought it up, he'd shut down, or worse, walk away. The media tried to pry, fans whispered, writers speculated, but Waylon kept the truth buried beneath layers of music, touring, and eventually, drugs. By the late 1960s, the pain had twisted into self-destruction. Waylon fell into a vicious cycle of cocaine, amphetamines, and pills. He rarely slept. He lost track of days. The pressure of fame mixed with unspoken guilt created a cocktail no human soul could hold forever. A close friend once said,
He wasn't chasing highs, he was outrunning ghosts. And the biggest ghost of all was Buddy.
In his private moments, Waylon confessed that he felt cursed, like fate had spared him for a reason he didn't understand. "Why me?" he'd ask, staring at a drink or the bottom of a pill bottle. "Why not me too?" He began flying as little as possible. Every takeoff was a prayer, every landing a memory. And those around him noticed. His first marriage had already crumbled by the mid-60s, a casualty of his erratic life and buried trauma. His relationships were volatile, marked by long absences, moody silences, and sudden rages. He could write songs that moved millions, but couldn't speak the words inside himself. In 1973, during a rare moment of reflection, he told a journalist, "I died that day too. I just kept waking up." For years, that one phrase, "I hope your plane crashes," echoed through his mind. He tried to laugh it off in interviews. He tried to chalk it up to bad luck, but the weight didn't budge. Even his success as a country outlaw, his wild albums, his defiant stance against Nashville, his legendary team-ups with Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash, none of it could drown out the sound of that silent field in Iowa. As his fame soared, his inner circle began to collapse. He burned through money and marriages. His health declined. Cocaine became a routine. At one point in the 80s, he admitted to spending over $1,500 a day on the drug. Some say it wasn't just addiction, it was punishment. He wanted to numb the survivor's guilt, to destroy the man who lived when his friends did not. The world saw a rebel, a cowboy, a legend. But those closest to him knew the truth. Waylon Jennings wasn't fighting the system, he was fighting himself. And for a long, painful stretch of his life, he was losing. It wasn't until the weight nearly crushed him that Waylon Jennings finally began to let go. By the late 1980s, after years of addiction, divorces, and disillusionment, Waylon found himself standing at the edge, physically exhausted, emotionally depleted, and spiritually hollow. It wasn't a headline or a tabloid scandal that brought him to his knees. It was something quieter, the realization that he could no longer carry the ghosts. He got clean. It was not easy, not graceful, and not immediate. But with the unwavering love of his fourth wife, Jessie Coulter, and the steadiness of his son, Shooter, Waylon began to claw his way back into the light. He distanced himself from the drug-fueled chaos of his past, cut ties with toxic influences, and found, perhaps for the first time in decades, a kind of fragile peace. Still, that night in 1959 never left him. In one of his final interviews, Waylon spoke softly about Buddy Holly. There was no bravado, no cowboy grin, just a man remembering his friend. He said, "I still think about him all the time. I still wonder why I lived." Then he paused. "Maybe God had a reason. I just never figured it out." He didn't cry. Waylon Jennings didn't cry in front of cameras. But his voice trembled just slightly, and in that tremble was 30 years of silence breaking. He never tried to rewrite history. He never denied his guilt or polished the story. He lived with it, and eventually accepted it. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no magical moment of healing. Just a man near the end of his life learning to breathe under the weight of what could have been.
In 2002, Waylon Jennings passed away from complications related to diabetes. But those who knew him say that in his final years he was lighter, still fiery, still stubborn, but gentler in the quiet moments. He found a way to live without forgetting, to honor without drowning. He never boarded that plane, but part of him never truly walked away from it. Sometimes, ladies and gentlemen, survival is not a gift, it's a sentence. And sometimes the only redemption is learning how to live with the echoes. Dear viewers, how do you forgive yourself for something that didn't kill you, but lives inside you like it did?
What happens when fate spares you, but leaves you holding the weight of everyone it didn't? Waylon Jennings didn't die in that Iowa cornfield, but every step he took afterward was marked by the absence of those who did. Every note he sang carried a shadow. Every laugh, every silence, every stage light. It all came back to that night, that plane, that one last joke. And he never got to take it back. We often talk about legends like Waylon in bold colors, outlaw, rebel, icon, but rarely do we speak of their burdens, of the nights they couldn't sleep, of the ghosts they never stopped hearing, of the pain they dressed in leather and steel-string guitars. Ladies and gentlemen, what would you have done if you had traded places, if your seat had been spared? If your words were the last someone heard before the end? Would you carry that guilt? Would you survive it? Or would you, like Waylon Jennings, try to outrun it with songs, speed, and silence until eventually you learn that running doesn't make it go away? Tonight, we don't end this story with an answer, because maybe there isn't one. Maybe all we're left with is the hum of a lost melody, the whisper of a friend's name, and a man who kept living, not because he wanted to, but because he had to. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Behind the music, behind the outlaw, was a boy from Texas who never meant to live longer than Buddy Holly. And yet he did. And that, perhaps, was the heaviest truth of all.